Thanks very much for joining me here. We've had a really good, interesting discussion so far, hearing about collaboration and then also from Tom on what's top of mind. We do have another farmer. We've tried to make sure we get as many voices on our panels. But this focus right now on this panel is a little bit more in keeping with collaboration, keeping with farmers, but really focusing on innovation that helps us unlock some of those food system goals. Like we want to think about it from the perspective of bringing together food manufacturers, food service, we talked about this earlier, retailers, to transform and build innovation across the value chain. We talked about the lack of innovation in finance. I'm sure you all have views on that. What do we need to do from an innovation in finance perspective? A lot of times when we think about innovation, we think about technology. What do you see working, particularly in technology as it relates to moving from pilots to scale? And also, what regulation is needed to encourage this across the value chain? So, with that, let's start with what you're defining as innovation and what you think is innovation that matters most. Matt, since you're joining virtually, would you like to kick us off with what innovation matters most to you?
Yeah, just double check that you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
And great. So I think that the farmer as innovator doesn't get enough attention. We often think of farmer as the adopter of innovation, and those who adopt earliest are the most innovative. But when we look at the challenges in front of us for environmental challenges, we see that the fastest, most cost-effective point of innovation is the farmer themselves. We can often shift dramatically within a 5-year period, changing our entire farming system. Now, if we're going to do that, as Tom Bradshaw mentioned, we need markets, we need regulation that supports that. But just the idea of the farmer that can innovate, we need to be broadening of what we grow, more diversity. And when you go up the supply chain, we're feeling just the opposite of that. We're feeling a narrowing of animal genetics, a narrowing of plant genetics, a narrowing of inputs into kind of the global supply chain. So our products become inputs for the innovation upstream. And so I think the real challenge is thinking about farmer as innovator, and are we resourcing that farmer to be innovative on their land for ecosystem services, and as Tom said, for more local production, and not just global trade, although global trade continues to be very important.
Simon, maybe I'd ask you to jump in. Do you agree? We've heard about farmers as being innovators today. Do you agree that that's where innovation is happening the most, or where else should we be looking?
Yeah, I would say innovation with the farmers and around the farmers. I think one of the big innovative breakthroughs we're seeing these days is that farming goes online and becomes data-driven. Think about how we'll probably touch on financial ecosystems later, but think about how algorithms have changed how finance works today just compared to 10, 20 years ago. We heard in a previous panel about how communities and neighborhoods help farmers innovate. I think the reality is that we are overlooking is that while farming is hugely heterogeneous, then we today have the backbone of data to unlock that, to optimize, to figure out, and that is also the backbone both for the farmers to optimize for resilience, climate adaptability, but it's also the backbone that ensures that the entire ecosystem, whether it's the supply chain, whether it's the financial ecosystem, have the transparency and the insight to actually be a supporting part of that transition.
So data as the backbone.
Yeah, and then I would probably take maybe the unpopular opinion that a lot of practices that needs to be adopted in this is actually not breakthrough innovation. A lot of this is readily available. It's the how that's the big gap here. It's not, we don't have to sit back and wait for the next decade for a PhD to come up with a breakthrough innovation. That's a moving target, but the foundation to scale this, to adapt this on exists today.
Alzbeta, can I ask you to jump in? What is innovation, the most critical piece of innovation for food systems for you?
Great question. So I'm going to take you to a mental picture of what innovation means in a food system. So when you take your lunch later today, divide your plate in half, and half of your plate is there because it's always there. And half of your plate is there because we have plant nutrients, also known as fertilizers. If we didn't have innovation, which happened around 1905, 1910, half of your plate would be empty. And it's not just your lunch plate, it's every single plate you take from now on for the rest of your life. That is innovation. So when we conceptually think about innovation in food systems, we need to think about two areas. One is what is happening in the factory, and second one, what you just talked about, is what happens on a farm. So when you look at a factory, there are two things that we need to explore. One is the energy systems. Why? Because we heard earlier this morning from Maximo Torreira from the FAO, energy is food. 70% of the cost of ammonia, nitrogen, is energy. If we don't have renewable energy investments that scale up at 10-fold, 15-fold, 20-fold, we are not going to make it. And the second part is what happens on a farm. How do we grow the plants? How do we use the data? How do we make sure that the experiments that scientists do don't sit in their drawers, but actually are used on a farm? How do we connect the vast amount of data that can actually allow us to farm better with less inputs, with better yields, and just better outputs?
Yeah. Harald, we've heard from two folks that define innovation, of course, farming and data, but also farming on the field, innovation on the field, sorry. What is your perspective in terms of innovation? Where do we need it most?
And many good points have been said. The way how we look at innovation, it needs actually to go through the entire food system. It needs to go from farm to fork. And the good thing is there is a lot of technologies and changes and things already available. So as we've just heard, it's not about coming up with the next mega big new breakthrough, but it's about many smaller innovations. And our latest research shows that actually a lot of value is in motion. It starts with preferences from consumers. They want to eat more healthy. They are actually more ready to use technology and AI to educate them on what they eat, what impact it has. And also further down the chain on many of the examples we've just seen. Our research says around 3 trillion of value, $3 trillion is in motion now. And that can be taken. And I think it's quite important to take an active step. And the other item on innovation that is important, it needs to create value. It needs to be economically viable. I think that's a point that cannot be estimated high enough. If there is no economic benefit in an innovation, it will not be able to scale to a significant level.
Yeah. Ashley, can I ask you to chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, coming from the perspective of a global fruit company and where we own many of our own farms, and I raised my hand because I've been to about a dozen of our farms just in the last couple of months. One thing is super clear to me that I think is echoed through many of these speakers. We cannot simply change agriculture practices. We have to redesign the entire food system in order to become resilient and to become sustainable. And the way that plays out when I'm on farms, visiting with farmers, is that there's not one technology. We may be looking at a robotic tractor to help reduce the burden on harvesters carrying the fruit into the truck. We might be looking at innovative fertilizer solutions, but there's not one single of those solutions that's going to solve the entire issue, that's going to make the farm resilient. It's 20 small, medium, and large solutions that have to happen over the next few years. And these farmers are really on the front lines of the kinds of changes that we're seeing in the world. The geopolitical changes, a lot of those have been talked about, and the climate changes. And so they're feeling the need for those solutions today. And that is, I think, the tension, that we have to move fast and we have to get as many of these solutions in place as quickly as possible.
And what is preventing it? Is it just the fact that the whole system needs to move together that feels like an arduous task? What is preventing us from being able to move quickly?
Yeah, I think that's there's some truth to that idea that the whole system has to move. So I don't think that change is necessarily being prevented in every case. I definitely see a lot of good innovation, a lot of good movement on the farm. I mentioned those robotic tractors. I mentioned the fertilizer solutions. We are expanding our own renewable energy on our farms throughout the world. So those solutions are happening. But I think you're right that what will make it happen at scale and happen more quickly is looking at it from that systems perspective. So one of the things we're doing now is pulling together what we're calling a model farm. So trying to just conceptually design for our fruit farms, what does that look like? What's the combination of traditional methods, machinery, technology, digital solutions, and people solutions that need to be put in place along with integrating with nature that get us to the place we want to go.
Maybe, Harold, why is this difficult for us to do?
Well, building on what you said, we are actually seeing, and we have divided into 29 areas, and that's a lot, right? And therefore, 29 areas where this change is happening and needs to happen and where value can be generated. But obviously, to a point where the needle is really changed and where you see the real impact, that takes some time. And we heard a lot about risk considerations in the course of today already. I mean, everybody does his pro and con sheets on any of these investments, and those things take time. That's, I think, where regulation comes into play that can speed up certain activities. But at the end, and that's our plea also, it's about picking and choosing the right things where for an individual company, an individual player, the biggest value sits, and starting there and doing things. And value is already in motion today. So things are already happening. It's not that we are talking about a theoretical exercise here, but obviously more of that will be required. So it's regulation and it's getting started where
we definitely need to talk regulation as something that allows for systems change. Alzbeta, can I ask you?
I will give you a controversial take on this. I think we need to learn again how the food gets onto our plate. And I think we need to start thinking how we actually align the system that allows that food to get on our plate. The previous speaker that you had here on a fireside chat mentioned a couple of conflicting regulations that directly prevent farmers from actually growing more food. So just understanding that the food on our plate is essentially the energy that we produce. And it could be renewable, it could be fossil fuels. Okay, let's do more of this, less of that. But once we start understanding how the food gets on our plate, then we can align that system that you were talking about, because there's a lot of moving pieces that need to go together. So I think the biggest thing that would move the needle is to start learning, for those of us who don't live on a farm, how that food gets on our plate. What do we need to have in place so that it gets on our plate efficiently, so that it's healthy, and take it from there.
So the education or lack thereof is one of the reasons why innovation is...
I think from our experience in many developed societies, developed countries, global north, if you were to put it this way, we have forgotten how the food is produced. I think in the global south, you can still see advertising for farmer products. You can see advertising for tractors. You can see the connectivity to the farm, to how the food is produced. I think in our societies here in Europe and maybe North America, we have forgotten a little bit how that works. And that is actually harmful to us, because then we cannot do what Ashley was talking about, to align that whole system so that it works in one.
So, Simon, I'll come back to you, but as the representative on the farm, Matt, can I ask you to jump in on that point as well? Why is it difficult? Alzbeta highlights that it's the fact that we've forgotten where our food comes from that's blocking innovation.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that hasn't been mentioned is market concentration, right? And as markets concentrate, and we see it in energy, we're now seeing it in big tech, and certainly we've seen it in agribusiness and food and agriculture, that we create these systems that it makes it very difficult for farmers to pivot. And there's a political sense there that the future is difficult and frightening. And as we've seen global concentration, we've seen a push back down onto farmers. So I think thinking about unleashing that innovation, as has been said, through the whole value chain. And that's very disruptive. But when we look at what we need better ecosystems, we need more diversity, we need more efficiency on the farm, we need better regulations to serve the farmers, right? All of that disruption can be a positive for farmers. It can be a positive for eaters, but it can be very, very challenging globally at the very top, where change is actually very expensive and a longer tail. And so I think that's one of the things to think about, is how are we connecting all these back to the farms and creating an environment where that innovation on the farm is rewarded and de-risked rather than increased increased risk and less opportunity for that innovation on the farm.
Simon, can I ask you to jump in here? You spoke of data, and I think what Matt highlighted is that we need to think about de-risking. Is there a big tech model we can use here for how do we fail fast? How do we encourage that farmers can innovate without losing their livelihoods?
Yeah, I think maybe just putting a perspective on it. So we work with 2,500 farmers across Europe, 20 countries. We literally track every single hectare of row crop production across Europe all the time. So it's actually quite interesting to see where change is happening. And I would say it's the confluence between risk and opportunity. So give you some concrete examples. We see huge adoption concentration in countries like Romania, Moldova, Ukraine. Why? Because they haven't seen a water drop for years, and therefore the value of inertia and keep going the same is lower. Therefore, the propensity for transformation is higher. It's between that and then the support system. Whether that support system can have, I think we all agree that systemic change is important, but we cannot let good stand in the way of great, or great stand in the way of good. Sorry. And therefore, we see many different support systems. I think we had an earlier panel here where Cargill was talking about their regenerative program. In some markets, it's more carbon markets program. It can be, we also see, just before we trash talk the financial sector too much, we actually also see banks leaning in with different incentive program. So let's just call it support programs. But it's in the inflection between those two things where the farmer sees real economic either non-viability opportunity and the support systems around it. And I think all that is available. And actually, I think just very concretely, when you actually start feeding back to farmers saying, this is what other farmers do, this is your optimization potential. Farmers have in many ways been innovating, but with the same fundamental DNA for many years, and actually seeing that panning out, whether it's through model farms, whether it's through reference points, and so on. I think there is a lot of technology that can be readily utilized for that.
So mindset is there. We just need to create the enabling environment.
Yeah, and we need to create that balance between, it's actually farmers need to take responsibility and accountability for their farming, and so they do. So it's not neither big tech, big finance, or big supply chain that have to bail them out on it, but create natural long-term support systems for it, underpinned by data.
And speaking of finance, what is the role of finance here? We've heard that innovation in finance is lacking. Do you agree with that? What would you suggest to change?
Yeah, I'll have to raise my hands. I spent 1.5 decades in banking, so I'm a little bit biased. I think innovation is lacking to some extent, but I think it's coming relatively rapidly. I think it's natural next curve. Of course, the first frontiers of this is the supply chain. All the way up to retailers. Financial ecosystem naturally comes along. I think financial ecosystems are mobilizing for two reasons. One is to play their role, and we see that in innovation in financial products like transition financing, for example. Instead of having an annual overdraft line, then you have 5-year transition financing lines in this. Machinery financing as an example. But we also see banks starting to realize that they're doing 30-year land loans where your erosion risk throughout that period is significant on the underlying assets, so they have collateral risk on their books, and therefore starting to emerge as a real both a compliance and risk management discipline in the banks.
Harold, I know you would like to jump in. You mentioned a big number. Are we seeing innovation in financing translate that value that you've talked about?
Yeah, I can only echo what has just been said. I think financing is coming along this year, a huge opportunity in this space. I think the most critical aspect actually is what are the right investments to finance, and who is taking the risk on taking those investments. I think it's hugely unfair to expect the most fragmented part of the value chain, the farming side, to bear the financing and the investment part. But as soon as also more international global players come into investment for some of those opportunities and new innovations, financing is coming along, and they are working on developing the methods along the way. So I would say it's more about the finding the right investments and who is actually standing behind those. So there is also the right risk equity or risk reward balance. That's the bigger challenge.
Yeah. As the multinational on the panel, Ashley, would you care to jump in that? Do you see this actually translating into innovation in finance across your value chain?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I'm going to focus in on climate risk here, because I would say in order to attract finance, the most important thing is that you have a strong business case. And the business case is clear. The only way forward to produce enough food for 10 billion, which is the theme of our talk, is to mitigate climate risk and to build resilience. And so if you can show the potential for loss, if you can show, especially in crops where farmers are already experiencing the changes, have already seen the disruption on their annual crop. When you can show that loss and then you can make the business case for, here are the 3 actions that I can do to shore up my crop better for next year, and then you present that, whether in our case, they're presenting it to the board, in other cases, maybe you have a financier, a bank. If you can make that compelling case, that's when you're going to get the finance. We, across Unifrutti Group, we did a climate risk assessment and strategy last year to really look into the climate models and into the changes already being experienced in all of our farms across the world, and included the farmers in that conversation so that they could then validate what the models said. And they actually identified some risks that the models didn't pick up. And through that, and through some work with some consultancies, we then developed a number of fairly simple actions, some requiring, small investment of tens of thousands of dollars, and some requiring larger investment of millions of dollars, like with some water storage and reservoirs and things like that. But what it made it real to be able to identify the climate risk, identify the potential loss, price that, and then say, here's the cost of the solution that is going to help to mitigate that risk over time. And that's given us the tools to now look at rolling out those kinds of investments over the course of the next several years.
Matt, can I ask you to jump in here? Do you see, from an on-farm perspective, enough innovation, or are you of the opinion that the financing sector is doing what it can do? As Ashley said, we have to have a strong business case, and then we just need to be innovating on-farm. Do you see, what's the role of finance in your opinion?
Well, it's the investment. When we look at the on-farm practices that probably have the best innovation for climate resilience, farmers led that, right? So it's no-till in the United States. It's no-till. It's integrating livestock intensive managed grazing. It's permaculture, which is cover crops, and expanding your rotation, so you're growing more diversity. And then it's energy. Farmers really led with biofuels and wind energy from the political and the investment standpoint. So when you look at those innovations, farmers have really done that innovation, and then business has followed. So investing in that kind of innovation, what's the future look like? We're looking at 60-inch corn rows, which have cover crops in the middle of it. Farmers are the ones who are doing that research and that kind of development. So I think you're spot on. We need the finance, we need the markets, we need the geopolitical. We've shifted in the United States now and shifted back, kind of organizing farmers into a more conservative response. And now farmers are shifting again, looking globally at the trade policies and things from the United States that aren't serving farmers. So a lot of disruption. But again, huge opportunities, right? By 2050, if we implement, as one of the panelists said, if we implement what we have and what we know, we could live in an even more hopeful world in 2050 or 2060 than we do now. But if we don't, then we're really looking at a catastrophe, right? We're looking at a collapse that's historical. So we're on that edge, and farmers play a huge role in that, as do all of us together.
Yeah. Can I ask the panel, one innovation that you think will be success? It could be a basic innovation, it could be foundational, it could be really interesting, that you think will help us achieve this goal of feeding 10 billion in 2050. What are you most excited by, and why? Simon, can I ask you to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll just say not something with data, but I actually come back to the financial innovation as we talked about before. I think there will be some quite interesting financial innovation in the cusp between lending and parametric insurance, because I think we're looking. For this to come together, you need the entire ecosystem, supply chains across rotations. You need the financial ecosystem. Therefore, you need new types of instruments that will work on this, that is fed by data, but where you have infrastructure with sound investment, but also downside parametric insurance structures. So I actually think new innovations, not on farm, but in the financial ecosystem around it, will take this from pilot. And I hate to say it, some of the numbers I heard from before, if you just add it up, we are talking about rounding errors on the total production of row crop, for example. Just to be very clear, it sounds great when we say the numbers, but it's still, if you divide them out, it's rounding errors. And therefore, for really take this, no multinational can do this on their own. To really take this to scale, we need to think about scaling rails. And I think financial innovation, that is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, finance. Ashley, would you agree?
Oh, yes, I'm nodding. So
Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree. And beyond that, what I was thinking is, it's not only about financial innovation, but getting the finance to the right places, right? So really identifying that sort of connection. Also, I often think about there are so many local sources of finance in agricultural communities, and ensuring that finance that's been going to support farmers and that's been going to rural agriculture, and making sure that finance is being directed towards the things that actually build our sustainability, build our resilience in the system, in addition to increasing production and things like that. So really directing the finance to the right places.
Alzbeta, can I ask you to jump in?
Sure. So a couple of things. One, just building up on what Ashley said, it will be connecting supply and demand. We do know how to produce decarbonized plant nutrients. We know how to produce many things that would make food system much less demanding of the planetary resources. But we have to make sure that whatever is financed at the front of the value chain leads all the way to demand, to the final consumer, to the FMCG goods, where it's actually reflected in the price. The second opportunity in innovation, in my view, is data, but slightly different from what Simon said. It's connecting all the data that we have in silos that can help farmer produce better and more efficiently. We have the weather data, we have the climate data, we have nutrient use efficiency data. We have lots of data, but they sit in silos. So if there is one collaborative tool, a super app for how to produce food better, I think we would get there.
Super app. I'll come to Matt and Harald. Just a reminder that we have about 5 minutes. I'd be keen to hear if you have any questions in the audience. Feel free to raise your hands, and then we'll have the mic come to you. But Matt, maybe I could ask you to chime in on what is an innovation that you're most excited about to feed 10 billion, and why?
We've got 10,000 years or more of technology in agriculture. And in the last, the Green Revolution shifted and really narrowed that, right? Which was great because it produced a lot of output very efficiently and effectively, and it was very effective. But going forward, we have to shift from forcing nature to do what we want it to do and partner with nature. And so I'm just very excited with the notion that we've got all of this technology, and it's not going back, it's going forward, but we can use that with data, with finance, with big computing, but on the ground with farmers. I think the future is going to be much more diverse. It's going to need more people. We're going to be managing land at smaller units. And all of this is exciting. It's a real opportunity for farmers, but it's going to take a mind shift, and it's going to take, the investment to make that happen. And as has been said, the consumer has to be along for the ride here, right? We have to all do this together. And I'm really hopeful. I think that there's a lot of possibility, but the headwinds are challenging, because if we don't all shift our mindset, then we're just kind of going off a cliff.
Harald.
Yeah. There are many great innovations to start with. The one I would highlight is using technology to allow data and information flow more seamlessly across the entire food system, across the entire value chain or even ecosystem, in order to reduce food waste. Now, I say this very specifically because there is an obvious immediate economic impact behind that. So the business case around such levers is typically positive very early on. And when doing that and starting there, it actually is a good enabler and a good starting point to build more on it. Once you have that seamless data flow, information flow, you can do better planning. Yes, it has an impact on food waste, but you can also do many other things on the back of it. So it's a very meaningful first step that does, in most of the cases, create a positive business case, which, as we said, is important to get the money. But it's a starting point to create more.
There are lots of lost inputs and other energy and other indirect. Any questions from the audience? Okay, great. I do see a hand here, and then another gentleman in the second row. So, we just get the mic to you.
Yes, Joseph for Oxford University. One of the big innovations that people talk about that could be like the next J-curve, like fertilizers, is cellular agriculture, lab-grown meat, cellular starch, synthetic carbohydrates. What's your take on cellular agriculture as a solution to food security and climate?
Alzbeta, did you want to jump in?
I don't have strong views on it. Our view on anything coming from that space, and that includes other spaces like alternative proteins, bring it on, bring the innovation on. We are in a world where we don't have the opportunity to do either or. We're in a world where we have to do and. So this is not a question of, does the plant nutrient come from manure? Does it come from a factory? Does it come from a mine? Bring it on. It needs to be, we need all of that, and we need to find a way to do it. Cellular, alternative proteins, you name it. We need to try it out, and we need to try it all, because we do not have a luxury of feeding 10 billion people in a few years the way how we're doing it today.
There was a question in the second row. Yes.
We started the day talking about food insecurity, in particular the Global South. Now we're talking about innovation and the cost of driving innovation across the system. How do you want to bridge the gap?
That's actually a really good question, because one of the things all of you mentioned was, having data flow through the system, access to finance, and making sure that we have really innovative financing solutions. But if a large number of smallholders either don't have access to a savings account or unreliable electricity, how are we ensuring that innovation gets to them?
I'm happy to give it a go. I'll go back to technology. Think about when payments started to go digital. That happened in Kenya. So I think what we're going to see is that technology will leapfrog this problem. What we see today, and the farmers we've been working with most of the last 7 years, they're the large farmers. They're the ones with the longer horizon. They're the ones with the data, the affinity to do this. I think the only way we're going to both, as you rightly said, direct the financing, the instruments to the smallholder farmers, but most importantly, actually giving them the business case, giving them the understanding, the education, the tools to go do these things, have to go through technology. That's your only option for scaling rails.
I'll add to it. I think we need to meet the farmer where the farmer is. I have seen a number of retail models around the world, including Sub-Saharan Africa, including Southeast Asia. You have to meet the farmer where the farmer is, and the farmer can learn from their phone. They can also learn from an agronomist. They can also learn from coming to a co-op and learn how to do finance on a farm and how to do this. So I think fundamentally there's no one technology that's going to change it. in every environment, we have to meet the farmer where they are and find a way, whether digital or not digital, to actually help them produce the best that they can on their farm.
Ashley,
And I'll just add to this really quickly because I think we're not there yet at Unifrutti, but I do believe that companies need to make better connections and take more responsibility with the farmers in their supply chain. So with Unifrutti, we're in this privileged position because we have direct ownership of so many of our farms, but we do have a large network of smallholder farmers as well. Once we really have a clear program and system with our own farmers, we need to bring them into the fold. And I think more and more consumer-facing companies are seeing the need to take responsibility for the farmers within their supply chain, and that they really need to be part of ensuring that they get access to the finance, access to the skill building and knowledge building that would then benefit all the way through to the consumer.
collective responsibility, I guess. All right. On that note, thank you very much to our panel for sharing your insights with us today, and thank you, Matt, for dialing in from Iowa. I would like to invite our next speaker up on stage.